Hello bachcho, let's read the question. So the question says, read the passage given below. The Battle of Chancellorsville, one of the most famous battles of the Civil War, took place in Virginia in the spring of 1863. For months, two armies had been stacked out on opposite banks of a narrow river. The Confederate troops were led by perhaps the most revered military tactician in American history, General Robert E. Lee. The Union soldiers were led by Fighting Joe Hooker. In appearance, personality, and lifestyle, these men were nearly perfect opposites. Lee, an older man in poor health with a grey beard, had a somber, in-measured demeanor. Hooker was a blond, strapping young man whose vanity over his appearance was but one aspect of his egotism. Whereas Lee was devout and principled, Hooker was known as rollicking enjoyment. Despite the fact the Confederacy had won last four major battles and the Union soldiers were famished, exhausted, and demoralized, Hooker proclaimed, "My plans are perfect, and when I start to carry them out, may God have mercy on Bobby Lee, for I shall have none." Why, aside from propensity for narcissism, was Hooker so confident? Hooker had used spies, analysts, and even hot-air balloons to compile a vast amount of intelligence about Lee's army. He had discerned, for example, that Lee had only 61,000 men to Hooker's own 134,000. Buoyed by his superior numbers, Hooker covertly moved 70,000 of his men 15 miles up and across the river, and then ordered them to sneak back down to position themselves behind Lee's army. In effect, Hooker had cut off the Confederate soldiers in front and behind. They were trapped. Satisfied with his advantage, Hooker became convinced that Lee's only option was to retreat to Richmond, thus assuring a Union victory. Yet Lee, despite his disadvantages of both numbers and position, did not retreat. Instead, he moved his troops into position to attack. Union soldiers who tried to warn Hooker that Lee was on the offensive were dismissed as cowards. Having become convinced that Lee had no choice but to retreat, Hooker began to ignore reality. When Lee's army attacked the Union soldiers at 5 p.m., they were eating supper. Completely unprepared for battle, they abandoned their rifles and fled. Lee's troops came shrieking out of the brush, bayonets down. Against all odds, Lee won the Battle of Chancellorsville, and Hooker's forces withdrew in defeat. Now, this is basically a depiction of the casualties at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Now, on the basis of your understanding of the passage, answer the following questions. If the passage were to continue, which of the following would most likely be the first sentence of the next paragraph? तो ये बच्चों सबसे पहले पैराग्राफ समझते हैं। तो ये पैराग्राफ की बात हो रही है बैटल ऑफ चांसेसविल के बारे में, जो बहुत एक फेमस बैटल था ऑफ द सिविल वॉर व्हिच टुक इन वर्जीनिया इन द स्प्रिंग ऑफ 1863। तो ये दो इसमें आर्मीज लड़ रही थी आपस में। एक कॉन्फेडरेट ट्रूप्स थे जिसको लीड कर रहे थे जनरल रॉबर्ट ई ली, और एक यूनियन सोल्जर्स का ट्रूप था जिसको लीड कर रहे थे जो हुकर। अब इन दोनों लीडर्स की पर्सनालिटीज, अपीयरेंस, लाइफस्टाइल बिल्कुल ऑपोजिट था एक दूसरे से। और इस पैसेज में ये बताया गया है कि डिस्पाइट ली की आर्मी छोटी थी इन नंबर्स एंड इन पोजीशंस, तभी भी वो ओवर कॉन्फिडेंट जो हुकर को कैसे हराते हैं बाय हिज प्रिंसिपल्स। तो अगर मैं बात करूँ क्वेश्चन की, on the basis of your understanding of the passage, answer the following questions। तो हमें देखना पड़ेगा ये पैसेज एंड कैसे हुआ है। तो एंड ऐसे हुआ है, they abandoned their rifles and fled as Lee's troops came shrieking out of the brush, bayonets down. Against all odds, Lee won the Battle of Chancellorsville and Hooker's forces withdrew in defeat। तो हम पहला ऑप्शन पढ़ते हैं। His army routed, Hooker and his reduced forces hopped south back to the center and Confederate operations, where he was harshly rebuked for having squandered his vast army। So this is very negative and won't sound good, तो हम इसको रिजेक्ट करके बी ऑप्शन पे आते हैं। In all his days of fighting, Hooker had never been met with such a surprise and opposition. He took to solemn contemplation of his events that had transpired, as well as the lessons he might learn them। इसको हम ऑप्शन दे सकते हैं, but until we read other options। Now option C. Upon returning to the camp, the triumphant Lee immediately ordered for supplies to be bought up and provisions made for Russia's victory celebration। तो ये बिल्कुल ऑपोजिट है जो ली हमें पैसेज में बताया गया है। क्यों? क्योंकि वो एक प्रिंसिपल मैन था एंड ही वाज डिवोट। सो वो कभी ऐसा नहीं करता एंड वो कभी अपने सेलिब्रेशन को इतना बड़ा नहीं बनाता because he was a principled man, so he would not be very happy in his victory. He would want more. Now option तो हम C को बिल्कुल reject कर देंगे. Option D, wounded in both body and spirit, Hooker and his severely diminished forces retreated to higher ground where they proceeded to reload their weapons and prepare for a counter attack. So this is not true. So हम इसको भी reject करते हैं because ये कहीं आगे हमें बताया नहीं जाएगा. Now option E, not one to gloat over his success, Lee remarked that the victory had been the product of valiant fighting and good luck as he began to map out strategies for their next move. Yes. So this was I was talking about. मैं इसी की बात कर रहा था because he was a principled man, so he would want more. So this would be the correct option. So we would write option number E, which is not one to gloat over his success. Lee remarked that the victory had been product of valiant fighting and luck as he began to map out strategies for their next move. Strategies for their next move. So the correct option is option number E. Not one to gloat over his success, Lee remarked that the victory had been the product of valiant fighting and good luck as he began to map out strategies for the next move. I hope you understood it well. Best of luck.